Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Flex That Works. We're here live in Manchester for GCUC UK and we are joined now by Alexandra Livesey from CEO of Little Red Donkey and Jonny Rosenblatt, CEO and Co-Founder of Spacemade. Great to have you here, guys.
Great to be here.
And you're just off the stage, you've just been on a panel. How did it go?
It was good. I thought it was engaging, it was interesting. We talked a lot about data, about win as a concept and how the industry needs to aggregate data in order to make better decisions and promote the industry. And then we talked about, the growth of a regional business and how do you grow in regions, how do you grow across multiple cities and the challenges that come with it. So it was a really useful conversation.
Yeah. Fantastic. I can start with you, Alexandra. I was curious and I was wanting to ask you about brands, workspaces, what you see kind of operating currently, regional spaces versus multi-location operators. Brand is a huge question. Is there anything, if operators are listening, around their own identity and brand and how they can grow it? I think maybe some people put a lot of emphasis on it, maybe too much, and they're getting stressed out. What would be your kind of top tips or advice for operators who do want to have a strong brand but not get totally lost in trying to build it, maybe?
Understand the difference between brand and marketing. Currently devising two different operators on it, and I'm not a brand expert and I'm not a marketeer, but I'm an operator in operational real estate for quite a number of decades. The difference is a lot of them, if you ask them, can you articulate your brand in one sentence? And they can't. They'll talk around it, but they can't actually articulate their brand in one sentence. But those brands who are strong, that everyone clearly understands and know what they stand for, the owners can do that. So I think that's where it starts with the brand. And once you have that and you actually clearly message that through the team, then you're there. When I talk to some of these operators or founders who have created a brand, and there are a lot of them who've been around 10, 15, 20 years, regional operators, there are over 200 of them in the UK. Most of us could probably talk about 15, maybe 20, potentially. So it's a small proportion, but when you talk to the big bulk of the others, when they talk about brand, they say, oh, I think we need a new website, or do we need to change the color, and so on. I'm like, that's not your brand. Those are assets that you use. Those are things you can change. That doesn't change who you are as a brand. If you take the orange out of EasyJet, it'll still be EasyJet, right?
And I suppose this can be, in many industries, if somebody starts their own business, they're not necessarily an expert in everything you need to grow a great business. And the same can happen in co-working. And people might not even have a background, not too many people went to university to study co-working. So pretty much everyone's done something else and found themselves in it.
Yeah.
What do you think is, can you, across those, 150 or so, they probably do have like an ambition, they probably do have a vision for how they'd like to do it, but there's obviously a gap between the ambition and how they're executing. Where do you think people are tripping up? What could they be doing to bring it to life?
I think the way I've always operated is I usually work down hard Monday to Thursdays, but Fridays I do a bit of admin work in the morning, but then the bulk of the time is sort of my thinking and my strategy time, and that's where I distill things and actually think what worked, what didn't work, and that's when I do sort of that analysis, not data analysis, but actually from a strategy perspective. And that's when I then think, okay, why did I create this? Why did I do this? What motivated me? And distill from that and the purpose of the creation of the brand. And once you start with that purpose, then you very quickly and organically will work through to your brand. But I've had that rule now for many years. And ring fencing that, I think, is key. A lot of people who start their own business just get so bogged down in the day-to-day and the firefighting and they don't even realize that what they do in those few hours on the Friday, where they're not going to turn the dial on the business anyway. Because most people that might want to sign a contract or similar are not going to answer the email on a Friday. But spending that time on the business itself rather than in the business, I think if they adopt just this one change, that will really start to pivot the business within a couple of weeks.
We see a lot of crossover in the co-working industry, and what's crossing over in my mind as you're speaking is The Artist's Way and Julia Cameron, and a concept of ring fencing some time in the week that's your protected time, and actually being able to hold the boundary to ensure that nothing else creeps into that is the skill set. I think what happens, some personalities though, is they actually get really bogged down when they talk about marketing or brand, and they get totally overwhelmed and then nothing happens. I think it's great to have a whole playbook for these things. But then there's the concept of being really scrappy and just getting out and doing doing business and letting it kind of form as it grows, you know. What would you say to somebody who's looking to, take that brand a step forward without spending a fortune? If maybe they don't have somebody on the team, or maybe budget's an issue, if resources are a little bit constrained, is there any kind of low-hanging fruit if they were to give themselves that time? What's like a good next step to bring something to life in a way that's meaningful for clients?
Yeah. I think for me, I always had a mentor in my life, somebody I could call up and that I could sense check things when I got stuck, or just talk it through. And that a lot of people are very willing to do that, because the mentee and the mentor will always get something out of it. And probably on the other side, not plugging the business, but what I do a lot now is doing that as a fractional role. So a lot of the smaller operators can't afford somebody with that sort of experience and knowledge and understanding as a full-time position into their business. But if you're staying purely on the strategy piece and you have somebody who is disciplined enough to do that as a fractional role in the business, that is affordable, and you can really see how quickly the teams within that business and themselves, how they're changing their thinking and how they're elevating it without bringing in a big heavy hitter on quite a substantial salary.
Yeah, and it's personalized to their business. It's just focusing on what will actually
and those fractional roles behave differently to a consultant. A consultant comes in, analyzes it and says, this is where you're rubbish, this is your gaps and so on, and this is what you need to do. And you look at the report and you're totally deflated because you're like, okay, why am I even doing this? If you have somebody that you bring in as a partner or as a mentor, it's a very different relationship. It's straight away a supportive relationship and a partnership. So you're actually looking at it and saying, okay, where are we gonna improve and tackle first? And really sort of also celebrate the successes together. You're in it together.
And I think owner-operators can find it hard to take help, so maybe it's a good reminder to, you're not supposed to be really good at necessarily everything yourself, So yeah, it's something to consider. Jonny, would you love to give us a couple of words about Spacemade?
Sure, yeah. So Spacemade, I started Spacemade with my co-founder 6.5 years ago. The whole essence really was that we wanted to create a co-working business, a flexible workspace business that landlords could go and deliver flexible workspace directly to their end user. What we were seeing was this huge chasm between the traditional world and the co-working world, where actually the co-working sector was kind of eating into that traditional market. And I was getting a lot of calls from landlords saying, I want to create a WeWork. That was verbatim generally what people used to ask me. And so we decided, actually, let's create something that we can open a business, create a brand, create a product that's unique to the building, rather than saying, here's a building that works for my brand. We look at the building, we look at the asset or the strategy that the landlord has for that asset, and we create a product that works for it. And so that was the kind of that was the essence and the starting point. And we opened our first space in Leeds in December 19. We had a great 3 months, and then the world fell apart. But actually what then happened was that there was just this huge shift towards actually landlords having to think differently about their space. The world changed dramatically, as we all know, and actually the delivery mechanism for commercial real estate changed as a result. I think for the better. We were well placed to kind of, take advantage of that change. But I think for the better, because actually what happened was that landlords had to think about their space. They had to think about how we deliver it. What do my tenants actually want? It's not like, here's 5,000 square feet, it's empty, go and fit it out and pay me rent. That kind of left the stratosphere. And actually what happened was we just moved into a world where actually 6 years later, we've got this kind of huge convergence of flex and co-working and managed space and Cat A plus space, and suddenly everyone who owns or operates real estate is thinking about the customer. And I think we've got to a much better place as a result of what happened. So generally I think that's sort of the story behind why we started. We've grown over the last 6 years. We next week open space number 18. It's about 300,000 square feet of space in total across 18, not one building. That would be quite big. And so, we've grown, and I think the market's grown with us as well. So we continue to build the business. 65 members of staff now, 18 sites, about 4,500 members. So wow. Growth keeps coming our way, and there's obviously challenges growing quickly, but it's exciting, and it's an exciting industry to be in.
And Jonny, we're all very aware that kind of that slow down to speed up moment that happened with flex and co-working. With the landlords that were calling you up pre-COVID and saying, look, can I have a WeWork in my space, please? Are they now, have you seen, we found ourselves in our business that pre-education piece is now gone. We didn't have to explain what co-working is or flex anymore. So you've seen the landlords come in from a far more informed position, I'd imagine, at this stage?
I think, yes, I think so. I think there is still an education piece. There's always an education piece. It's very different if you're an asset manager or a fund manager who has traditionally taken on a building, you're a capital allocator, you find an asset and you basically want to drive rent from it. Actually, if you're suddenly going to a landlord and saying, you're gonna have to spend the money on it and you're gonna pay us to come in, there is obviously an education piece that's required. But I think, to your point, most see quite clearly the advantage of having flex space in their building, because it drives wider occupancy. So even if you're part of a building, they see it as an amenity play. It activates the space. It creates an energy in the space. It allows them to access different types of tenants who will grow within their building. And so I think it's sort of increasingly, it feels widely accepted that is the route to driving a building. And by kind of accepting that, then actually I suppose the education comes on the nuances of, how does a management agreement get structured? What are the kind of details that sit behind it? And there are now many advisors in the sector who can help shape that kind of journey for a landlord. And so, I think the education piece is important, but it has definitely moved on from, me walking up with a deck and going, this is what I want to do in your building, and they're like, whoa, I did not see that coming. Yeah. So the market has definitely shifted, and I think in a much more kind of operator, asset owner kind of partnership way. I think that is much widely accepted now.
The playbook seems to be becoming very formulaic, in that you get your coffee shop in downstairs, maybe 2 floors of co-work and flex, and then you fill the floors above that with I suppose, larger people will take a floor at a go. Can you ever see that being disrupted now, or is that what we're going to see for the next 10, 15 years, do you think?
I think it will continue to evolve. I think the markets never stay the same, and so I think the acceptance that you're going to have an element of that will remain. We're not going back to every building is going to be leased up on 10-year leases floor by floor. I think that has gone, but I think the methodology around how you deliver that kind of stack in a building will evolve. I think you can see growth in the managed sector in a way that 5 years ago it was very small. It seems to be a growth area right now. I think co-working has many different forms, and perhaps as an industry, and maybe this is a conversation for another time, as an industry, I don't think we're great at articulating the different types of products that exist in our sector. And actually, if we can't articulate it, how on earth is our customer going to really understand it? But I think as that evolves, and to the point that was discussed earlier around brand, I think what starts to happen is that the brands in our sector are becoming more mature and becoming more known. And what that does is gives the customer and the members a sense of what to expect from that delivery mechanism. And really what they're after, in my book, is certainly on a corporate level, but corporates want to outsource the management of their space and it to be professionalized. And they, as we have many different brands, you can start to see the different offerings that exist within the kind of ecosystem of co-working. And that, I think, is really exciting because 15 years ago that wasn't at all like that. Your brand was important to you, but it wasn't important to anyone else. It was just a name of your product. And whereas now actually different brands stand for different things. We've still got a long way to go before those are widely accepted, but actually I think we're well on the way on that journey.
I'd agree.
What do you think about how operators and landlords are interacting? As there are more established brands coming out, do operators go in with their own playbook and approach a landlord? Is it different for landlords to deal with different operators, or do you feel like there's a need to standardise things? Or maybe it's a bit of an angle for you guys if it's something you do well.
That is what we do, and we approach landlords, we create a product for them. I think probably, speaking candidly, I think where landlords maybe sometimes slightly struggle, and again, as an industry, we probably need to get a bit better at this, but there are so many variations on a management agreement. And, for a landlord and for an operator, the key to delivering a really successful building is how well you execute that management agreement right at the start. And actually, everything that goes into that initial negotiation really determines the success of what happens. Obviously, you've got to fill the building, but let's assume you can. So much of that success is around the alignment. And so I think the challenge is that every operator has a slight variation on it. And so that's really where good advisors in the sector come into play, because they need to be able to help a landlord navigate those. But I think that's probably the biggest challenge, but the acceptance is definitely there that, you're a landlord, you're an operator, there is a very clear marriage value to kind of working together.
If operators are starting out today and just getting started with management agreements, interacting with landlords, all of that, if you were starting now, what would you do differently to 6 years ago?
It's a really good question. I would say it's probably really hard to start today with a management agreement that basically that doesn't involve kind of putting capital into a deal. So most people I see starting today, they're putting some element of kind of skin in the game, because actually there's no reputation to sit behind them, or there's no, they're a new entrant into the market, and so you've got to create some assurance. And so I think reputation is a really important thing in this industry, and it's to be protected if you have it and you can be afforded a kind of a strong reputation in the market. But actually, it takes time to build that. I had another business previously which enabled me perhaps to start again from this one. It was still really difficult to start, but I guess because I had that sort of track record beforehand, that gave me maybe a slight advantage where I can actually say to someone, I know what I'm doing. Persuading a landlord, you know what you're doing when you haven't done it before, is hard, but there are many really, really good operators. I've met loads today, you know, really strong operators that have started from scratch in the last couple of years, and you know, credit to them. It's not an easy industry, and people are pushing through really, really well. So I think it's exciting. I think for those operators raising investment, I think this sector is quite an interesting one to raise investment for, because most investors get it. It's quite tangible, and we understand the office. We understand how we can make the office better. We've all sat in crap offices, right? We've all sat in places that are really uninspiring, and you don't get to connect with other people. So the storytelling behind that is imperative. And I think if you can, as a new entrant to the market, if you can execute that story and that narrative really, really well, I think that's like half the battle to getting a foot in the door.
Do you think the framework needs to be different between, we'll say, main urban centres, the bigger cities, versus people starting up in more regional cities to almost rural?
Yeah, I think if the more localized you go, the more it's more about boots on the ground. It's like you have to understand your local market really well. But you have to do that generally anyway. But you know, you can be, you know, most of my business operates in London. You know, we've got 16 sites in London. We're based in London, and so you know, you have an understanding of it. But I think once you get into, you know, even beyond the kind of big 6 regional cities, and you get into more like rural locations, and maybe you can talk with a bit more experience about this. Rural is probably not the right word, but smaller locations, you've got to be in the detail. You've got to understand your customer to the point of you know, spending time with them and talking to them and understanding their needs in a way that perhaps you can create a really great space in London and get your pricing right and get your marketing strategy right, and actually people will still come to you. So I think it's slightly different. I remember my last business, I started in Manchester. I opened a building in Manchester in beginning of 2017, and for most of 2016 I was here just having to educate the market as to what co-working was. Now, you know, 10 years later, it's thriving here. There's the most phenomenal spaces, but at that time, it was just about being here, explaining to people, getting those like influential people who can kind of speak on your behalf to really understand your product. That was absolutely critical, and we wouldn't have succeeded if we didn't do that right at the start before we launched.
So interesting to see where the industry is now. Would you like to add to that, Alex?
Yeah, what I would probably say to that is it's growing up, but I think it's probably needs to develop further. I do think that it's still too stuck in the sort of box of an office building. I think in regions you have way more opportunity to create interesting spaces in very left field locations and assets, buildings, sites that normally nobody would consider for that sort of product. I mean, you have some really interesting ones coming through, you know, when you look at there are a lot of buildings that we would have all discounted, but then TradeStars has come in and made those dark, dingy spaces work, because he pivoted into TikTok studios and what have you not. You know, I'm following up what he's doing. I'm like, brilliant idea. But as you said, I spoke to him. He said he spoke to 150 investors, and he kept on pitching until he found an investor that got it and was willing to put money behind it. And now they're flying, because he knew there was a niche. And I think that's a key thing. Is some people have said, oh, you have to be the one who does the most on community, who is the most connected in the local culture. You have to be the one with the best product. I probably strongly disagree with that. You have to know what's your niche, and you gotta stick with that. You know, Trade says, if this is these buildings that nobody can let because you don't get enough daylight, because they're boxed in on 3 sites, but you can actually create those studios. Brilliant. If you are in more rural areas, and you connected with a well-being and being outside and connecting it with other pieces like this, brilliant, it works as well. So this sort of just duality of having to have the best product or having to have the best and most events, I think is too narrow a field. I think there is way more interesting things that are happening, and it's diverging into other areas. I've been watching what they're doing in some of the health sector. You have NECA, which is some of the WeWork early employees started up, and they're literally taking this model into the health clinic world. And it's really interesting to see how it's starting to move across. You know, I expect to see gyms and so on pivoting some of their spaces. I expect hotels to start pivoting some of their spaces, you know, and start to work together and merge in these sort of fields. So I think we're gonna see way more of this sort of multi-use spaces within the same wrapper, rather than sticking to just work
and responding to the context of the environment it's in and the location. I think
that's a good point, because we work in the world of desks and offices and the products and services, and we visited a space in Lewisham called Blue Garage, and it's very manufacturing, you know, again, so like sometimes we can be, and I think you made a point, like sometimes we can be very focused on what we do in this industry, and see that there is other ways of working, and there's other ways, as you were saying, to essentially subdivide a space and sell it in a flexible manner, you know.
Which is, I think that's where it's going with AI. I actually think we're going to be an industry that's really well placed for what the world is going to need, which is going, even with UBI and things, it's going to be people will still need to come together, and they'll still they'll be doing something, whether it's work or creativity or something, they'll still need places to gather to do that thing. And in many cases, a lot of these brands are set up and ready to go. Like, we work with over 500 spaces, you know, our tech is supporting a network of spaces throughout Ireland, down to 2-desk GA clubs over a tourist office, these kinds of spaces, right up to then, you know, we come to the UK and obviously there's multi-location brands. They're all serving the same purpose in many ways, you know, just in lots of different formats.
And Marie made the point about the space that we work out of. Actually, it was a cinema, and then it was a bakery, and then it was a co-working space. And of the 50 desks that are there, none of us work in the same industry. The only common denominator we have is that we all like living near the sea. We all like living in the country.
That's their niche.
That's their niche, yeah.
But it's not even why they were opened. It's because of like a philanthropist locally, essentially, who wanted to just further the area, and the board behind that. But that's one of my favorite things about that location is the people behind the space. It's got like a 12-person board that I would say you could get into most boardrooms in the world if you leverage that board. Wow. Amazing connections, and you would never think it. You know, we're going for sea swims on Wednesday and it all looks very cute and fluffy, but that's the reality of what's going on behind it, and you count that as like one pin on a map, one local space, you know, one rural space. Jack is waving at me. I have one final question for each of you. One word aloud, okay? What's the best and worst thing about co-working?
How can I answer one word?
One word for each. Worst.
Yeah. The people. That was the best, by the way, not the worst. The worst. Gosh. The worst. Lack of transparency. It's 3 words, sorry.
Around?
Data, information. It's guarded. It's very, very guarded. I think part of the reason why something like Win as a collective group is really strong is that we've got now 9 million square feet of space all feeding in anonymized data, so that actually we can all make better decisions, and actually that the whole industry can be taken more seriously because there is clear, defined data that you can see performance levels across locations.
And it's a rising tide because
Absolutely.
it helps the industry mature.
100%.
And we're at that stage. I can really see the crossing of the chasm, we just have to like get to that mass market stage. So people are, yes, there's competition, but not on, once you introduce co-working and flex to a whole audience who doesn't know what they don't know, the competition
Absolutely.
shifts again.
Absolutely.
Broadens
Absolutely.
the whole thing up.
And you can have that institutionalized viewpoint that suddenly it's respected by the wider industry in a way that people can go, okay, I understand this now. I can create proper valuation methodology off the back of it. I can understand the way in which the building ebbs and flows and the occupancy levels ebb and flow, and it's really clear and it's really simple. And actually, without that, people kind of make up numbers, I think, in reality.
Yeah, and there's a bit of fake it till you make it, but the
A little bit.
conversations at the moment are all about the rates, and then how do we get, co-working and flex seen as valuable for infrastructure and just like something baseline that's provided in communities. But that's how you do it. There's like that messy middle where you kind of have to show your cards and accept that everyone's on the same team.
For sure. For sure.
Amazing. Over to you, Alex. The best and worst thing about co-working.
Best is probably the passion everyone has in the industry for it. Being in the industry and the people they're with, and I think that's what drives it forward. The worst is probably for me imposter syndrome, because I think every single person in this industry suffers from it, won't admit to it, and I want to be generous and say that's the reason why they all fib around their numbers and their data and so on, because they think everyone else is brilliant and what they're delivering is below par. So, and I'm just putting it down to imposter syndrome. It's, we're not being honest with each other that things are never 100%, things are never perfect, things are never full, things are never at max capacity, and so on. And I'd like to put it down for now as we're still a growing industry, so I do think there is still that imposter syndrome.
I think imposter syndrome creeps in when you feel like you're making up as you go along, and this whole industry is making it's creating itself as it goes along, and everybody's doing it together. So I'd understand why people might feel that.
So the power of dropping the guard a little bit, maybe that's the stage that we're at.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
I think everyone sees the need for it, and there's an element of if you go first, then I will. But I think even the creation of something like Win shows that people are willing to come to the table, and
absolutely.
People will get so curious because of what's coming out of that it will stop being anonymized at some stage, or the conversations are happening around the coffee table after. And people see the numbers are up there. My number's not so bad. Now I don't feel as bad. I'm willing to say to the person beside me what my numbers really are. And at least the smaller local conversations start happening potentially.
You'd hope so.
You'd hope so. Jonny, Alex, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been fantastic to have you here.
Thanks so much. That was great fun.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.